The Nina Tucker chimera scene represents anime's most infamous example of crossing moral lines, combining child endangerment with body horror to create something that violates every instinct about family protection. The scene's disturbing power comes from the setup. Viewers spend episodes watching Nina play with Ed and Al, establishing her as an innocent child who trusts and loves her father unconditionally. Show Tucker's revelation that he created a talking chimera by fusing Nina with her dog Alexander represents the ultimate betrayal of parental responsibility, showing someone treating their child as experimental material. The chimera's confused pleas of Ed, Ward, Big Brother, play, create horror through innocence, corrupted. Nina retains enough consciousness to recognize people but can't understand what's happened to her. The scene's lasting impact comes from its implications rather than graphic imagery. The horror lies in imagining Nina's confusion, pain, and the knowledge that her loving father deliberately destroyed her humanity. Tucker's casual explanation of his actions, treating Nina's transformation as a necessary sacrifice for his research, shows how people can rationalize the most horrific acts when they prioritize personal goals over human welfare. The scene disturbs because it forces viewers to confront that monsters often look like ordinary people, and that the greatest horrors come from those who should protect the innocent, choosing to exploit them instead. The eclipse sequence in Berserk represents anime's most devastating betrayal, combining sexual violence with supernatural horror to create scenes that fundamentally challenge viewers' faith in heroism and justice. The sequence's psychological horror comes from watching Griffith, a character viewers had admired despite his flaws, consciously choose to sacrifice everyone who had ever loved or trusted him for personal power. The rape of Casca, while forcing Guts to watch, represents cruelty designed specifically to inflict maximum psychological damage, showing Griffith using intimate violence as a weapon against his former friends. The scene's disturbing power lies in its calculated nature. And this isn't mindless violence, but deliberate psychological torture designed to break the spirits of people who had dedicated their lives to Griffith's dreams. The helplessness of Guts and Casca during the eclipse forces viewers to confront situations where heroism and determination aren't enough to prevent terrible outcomes, challenging typical anime power fantasies. The transformation of beloved characters into demonic entities while retaining enough humanity to understand their actions creates horror through recognition. These aren't mindless monsters, but people choosing evil. The scene's lasting trauma comes from its destruction of the Band of the Hawk's family bonds, showing how trust and love can be weaponized by those who understand their power over others. Johan Liebert's manipulation techniques in Monster create disturbing scenes not through graphic violence, but through demonstrating how easily human psychology can be exploited to turn people into monsters. The library massacre scene shows Johan's ability to convince ordinary people to commit murder through carefully constructed psychological manipulation, proving that evil isn't inherent but can be taught. His conversation with the middle-aged man about worthlessness demonstrates how Johan identifies people's deepest insecurities and uses them as weapons, turning self-doubt into self-destruction. The disturbing aspect of Johan's methods is their plausibility. His manipulation techniques are based on real psychological principles, making viewers question their own mental defenses. The scene where he convinces parents to kill their children by exploiting their fears about their children's futures shows how protective instincts can be twisted into destructive actions. Johan's ability to remain calm and charming while orchestrating psychological destruction creates cognitive dissonance that he appears helpful while being fundamentally evil. The most disturbing element is Johan's apparent lack of traditional motivation. He doesn't seek power or wealth, but seems to destroy lives purely to prove that human goodness is an illusion. His scenes disturb because they suggest that anyone could become a monster under the right psychological pressure, challenging viewers' beliefs about moral certainty and human nature. The human instrumentality sequences in Evangelion create psychological horror through their exploration of depression, isolation, and the complete breakdown of individual identity and reality. The scenes where characters' psychological barriers dissolve and their deepest traumas become visible represent the nightmare of having every private thought and shameful memory exposed. Shinji's confrontations with different versions of himself and others create existential horror about the nature of identity and whether individual consciousness has any meaning or value. The imagery of characters dissolving into orange LCL while retaining consciousness suggests the horror of death without the mercy of unconsciousness, creating claustrophobic panic about losing physical form. The scenes disturb through their representation of depression and suicidal ideation as potentially universal experiences, suggesting that Shinji's psychological struggles reflect everyone's inner darkness. The breakdown of animation quality during these sequences creates meta-horror about the medium itself breaking down, making viewers question the reality of what they're experiencing. The most unsettling aspect is the suggestion that individual consciousness might be a burden rather than a gift, and that the dissolution of self could be preferable to continued existence. These scenes create lasting disturbance because they attack the fundamental assumptions about selfhood and meaning that viewers use to navigate their own psychological experiences. Tomie's horrific regeneration scenes create body horror that disturbs through their combination of sexuality and decay, showing how beauty can become monstrous when divorced from humanity. The scenes where Tomie regenerates from small body parts, growing back to full form while retaining consciousness throughout the process, create horror through impossible biology that violates natural laws. The disturbing element comes from Tomie's awareness. During regeneration, the Sime experiences being torn apart and growing back together, suggesting indescribable physical and psychological trauma. Her ability to drive people to violence through supernatural beauty creates uncomfortable questions about desire, obsession, and the relationship between attraction and destruction. The scenes where multiple Tomie copies exist simultaneously, each claiming to be the real one while trying to eliminate the others, create existential horror about identity and authenticity. The regeneration process itself is depicted with clinical detail that makes the impossible seem medical and scientific, adding realism to fantasy horror. The most disturbing aspect is Tomie's apparent enjoyment of the cycle of seduction, violence, and rebirth, suggesting someone who finds pleasure in driving others to commit atrocities. The scenes create lasting unease because they suggest that beauty and desire can be weapons used to destroy both the desired and the desirer, making attraction itself seem dangerous. Happy Sugar Life's exploration of obsessive love through Satou's psychological deterioration creates disturbing scenes by presenting genuine care twisted into something monstrous and predatory. The scenes where Satou convinces herself that her actions are motivated by love while clearly engaging in abusive behavior create horror through self-deception and rationalization. Her interactions with Shio become increasingly disturbing as viewers realize that Satou's protection is actually imprisonment disguised as affection, showing how love can become possessive control. The most unsettling aspect is Satou's genuine belief in her own goodness. She isn't consciously evil, but has constructed a reality where her harmful actions seem necessary and loving. The series creates discomfort by showing how isolation and trauma can corrupt someone's understanding of healthy relationships, making abuse seem like care. Satou's willingness to kill to maintain her happy life with Shio demonstrates how people can escalate harmful behavior when they've convinced themselves it serves a greater good. The disturbing power comes from the show's refusal to present Satou as obviously monstrous. Her motivations are understandable even when her actions are horrific. The scenes force viewers to confront how thin the line can be between protective love and destructive obsession, making them question their own understanding of healthy relationships. The truth sequences in Fullmetal Alchemist create existential horror through their depiction of cosmic indifference and the suggestion that human suffering might be meaningless in the grand scheme of existence. The scenes where characters face truth and have their deepest assumptions about reality challenged create psychological horror through the breakdown of certainty and meaning. Truth's casual attitude toward human suffering and its suggestion that equivalent exchange is merely a human construct create disturbing implications about the nature of justice and fairness. The body horror elements, particularly Ed losing his leg and Al losing his entire body, are made more disturbing by Truth's clinical detachment and seeming amusement at their pain. The revelation that Truth appears as a version of each person suggests that people are ultimately responsible for their own suffering, creating guilt and self-doubt about personal responsibility. The white void, where Truth resides, creates claustrophobic horror about infinity and emptiness, suggesting spaces where normal reality doesn't apply and human understanding becomes meaningless. The most disturbing aspect is Truth's implication that seeking knowledge and power inevitably leads to suffering, challenging the fundamental human drive for understanding and growth. These scenes create lasting unease because they suggest that the universe might be fundamentally indifferent to human values and that seeking truth could be inherently destructive. Bondrewd's experiments on children in Maiden Abyss create horror through their combination of scientific curiosity with complete moral indifference, showing how rationalization can justify any atrocity. The revelation of Bondrewd's cartridge system, where children are transformed into life support devices, creates body horror through the systematic dehumanization of victims. The disturbing aspect comes from Bondrewd's genuine affection for his victims. He isn't sadistic, but treats horrific experimentation as necessary scientific work while maintaining emotional attachments. The scenes showing the process of creating cartridges, with children being surgically modified while conscious, represent medical horror that violates every assumption about healing and care. Prushka's transformation into Bondrewd's final cartridge becomes especially disturbing because viewers have seen their relationship develop, making her fate feel like a betrayal of parental trust. The most unsettling element is Bondrewd's complete lack of moral conflict. He genuinely believes his research justifies any cost and sees his affection for his victims as proof of his humanity. The series creates discomfort by presenting Bondrewd as articulate and reasonable, showing how people can maintain social facades while engaging in monstrous behavior. The scenes force viewers to confront how scientific advancement and exploration can be used to rationalize the most horrific treatment of vulnerable people. The scenes depicting Ragyo's sexual abuse of her daughters create disturbing content through their combination of familial violation with supernatural elements, showing how power corrupts family relationships. The bath scene between Ragyo and Satsuki creates horror through its depiction of sexual abuse, disguised as maternal affection, showing how predators can manipulate familial bonds. The disturbing aspect comes from the series' presentation of this abuse as part of Ragyo's broader corruption by life fibers, suggesting how power can fundamentally alter someone's humanity. The scenes where Ragyo touches Satsuki inappropriately while discussing her expectations create tension between parental authority and sexual violation, showing how abuse can be disguised as guidance. The revelation that Ragyo experimented on her infant daughters, literally sewing life fibers into their bodies, represents medical and parental horror combined. The most unsettling element is Ragyo's complete lack of recognition that her behavior is inappropriate. She has been so corrupted that she no longer understands normal human boundaries. The series creates discomfort by showing how Satsuki has learned to endure this abuse while planning her revenge, demonstrating the psychological survival mechanisms abuse victims develop. The scenes disturb because they show how people in authority can exploit their positions to harm those they should protect, using love and family bonds as weapons. Asuka's psychological deterioration throughout Evangelion creates disturbing scenes through their realistic depiction of mental illness and the complete breakdown of a previously strong character. The scenes where Asuka discovers her declining sync rates and begins to panic about losing her identity as an EVA pilot show how self-worth tied to performance can become self-destructive. Her breakdown in the hospital, culminating in her catatonic state, creates horror through its realistic depiction of severe depression and psychological trauma. The most disturbing aspect is watching someone who had been confident and capable completely lose their sense of self and purpose, showing how quickly mental health can deteriorate. The scenes where Asuka repeatedly says she doesn't want to die, while clearly engaging in self-destructive behavior, create tension between conscious and unconscious desires. Her final battle against the mass production EVAs, where she briefly recovers only to be brutally defeated, represents false hope followed by complete destruction. The disturbing power comes from the series' refusal to romanticize mental illness. Asuka's breakdown is neither beautiful nor redemptive, but simply tragic and painful. The scenes create lasting unease because they show how trauma and pressure can destroy even the strongest people, making viewers question their own psychological resilience. The revelation of Isabella's true role and backstory in The Promised Neverland creates horror through the realization that maternal figures can be complicit in systematic child abuse when survival requires it. The scenes showing Isabella's genuine love for the children, while knowing she's raising them for slaughter, create cognitive dissonance between her actions and emotions. The flashback revealing that Isabella was once a child in the same system and chose to become a mom rather than die, shows how survival can require people to become complicit in their own oppression. The most disturbing aspect is Isabella's lullaby, which she sings both as comfort for the children and as a reminder of her own lost childhood and dead friend. The revelation that all the moms are former children from the farms creates systemic horror about how oppressive systems perpetuate themselves by forcing victims to become perpetrators. Isabella's final choice to help the children escape. Knowing it will cost her life creates complex emotions about redemption and whether good intentions can justify previous harm. The series creates discomfort by showing how people can maintain genuine love while participating in systems that harm those they care about, making moral judgment complex. The scenes disturb because they show how survival can require moral compromise and how systems of oppression maintain themselves by eliminating alternatives to participation. School Day's infamous ending creates disturbing content through its sudden shift from romantic comedy to graphic violence, showing how toxic relationships can escalate to deadly consequences. The series build-up, showing Makoto's increasingly manipulative and abusive behavior toward multiple girls, creates a realistic portrait of emotional abuse and sexual exploitation. The final episodes shift into horror territory, with Sakai's murder of Makoto and Kotonoha's subsequent revenge represents how abuse and betrayal can drive people to violence. The most disturbing aspect is the series' realistic depiction of teenage sexuality and manipulation, showing how inexperience and selfishness can create genuinely harmful relationship dynamics. The graphic nature of the violence, particularly the detailed depiction of Makoto's death and dismemberment, creates shock through its contrast with the series' previous tone. Kotonoha's final psychological breakdown, where she kills Sakai and carries Makoto's severed head, represents complete mental collapse caused by betrayal and abuse. The series creates discomfort by showing how ordinary teenage relationship drama can escalate into life-destroying trauma when healthy boundaries and communication are absent. The ending disturbs because it suggests that toxic relationship patterns can lead to real violence, making viewers reconsider how seriously to take emotional abuse and manipulation.